Hello, welcome to my talk on COVID-19 and flattening the curve, a feedback control perspective. This is a joint work between several institutions, but most importantly, between two set of people, Francesco Lauro and Istvan, who are experts in pandemic modeling, while Daniela and myself are on the control side, on the artificial intelligence side. And when we look at the control of COVID pandemics, it's even hard to specifically tell what we mean by this control problem. And as usual in control, we have to identify an input, a dynamics, and an output. But here, all the three things are not well specified. For what concerns the inputs, there are a bunch of possible things that we can do to attack the spreading of the pandemics. And in this work, we will focus on non-medical intervention, modeling them generically as social distancing or as reduction of the chance of infecting one subject. Yet it remains open what we mean with COVID-19 dynamics and what we want to choose as our control goal. The answer to the first question comes from the state-of-the-art of epidemics modeling. And we use here a state-of-the-art model, which is based on an actual structure where we have our nodes representing individuals, and each individual can be either infected or not. We'll see that in a second. And the edges represent social connection between these people. And in this work, we will assume this social network to be static. And we model the evolution of the spreading of the disease as a continuum Markov chain defined on the network. So if we now zoom in one single node, for example, here we have one node that is susceptible, meaning that still has to get infected. We have two nodes that are already been infected, one that is now recovered and healthy, and each one represents a subject with its own state. These healthy subjects in time can transition from one state to the following one with a certain probability. And so it can move from being healthy to be exposed. So the pathogen starts to evolve in the body of the subject, but still is not enough to present symptoms. And then from here, we can evolve into be full-fledged infected. And then from here, we transition with a certain probability to death and to another probability to being healthy again and recovered. And for the scope of this work, immune. And this is just an example of how an evolution of this pathogen on a network of this kind would look like. And this is, keep in mind that this is a quite small network if compared to the ones that we will consider in the following. But still, it is already a quite hard dynamical systems that we are considering here, stochastic, nonlinear, very high dimensional, and with quantized states. So this is too complex to be attacked directly, at least as a whole. And what we instead did was to try to define rules, simple rules, to interface ourselves with these systems in a way that strongly simplifies its complexity. And what we do is therefore to define an input and output map, and then do a mean field approximation so that in average, we can look at these complex dynamics, network dynamics, as a simple and well-known predator-prey dynamics. And you can find here the details of this, this derivation of these two maps, and more about that in the paper. So this very simple algebraic input and output mapping defines an interface to a low-level low-dimensional system. And now, in order to really close the loop, we have to clarify ourselves which is our control goal. And here, when it comes to dealing with a pandemic, it's practically infeasible to directly attack the problem through a specific goal, through a model-based optimal control fashion. So what we did instead was to look at the strategy that all the government tried to implement, and it's also motivated by the state-of-the-art in epidemics research, which was to try to flatten the curve. So to focus on the evolution of the infected subjects and try to keep this amount of subject under a certain threshold. So more specifically, we can see here the 3 ideal strategies. One is to not implement no social distancing, and this of course creates a high number of infected in a short time, and soon we move over the maximum healthcare capacity, and here we have a critical increase of deaths. On the other spectrum, we have total lockdown, which in the short term, of course, works pretty well in terms of reduction of infected subjects and also reduction of deaths, but it cannot last forever. So at some point, it has to be released when the infections are almost 0. But what happens is that when you release it, it diverges again, and it behaves as if we had no social distancing, but just delayed. Instead, the curve flattening strategy has as a basic idea the one of letting the virus to spread for that amount in which it can be cured by the healthcare system. We try to tackle in our framework this problem by a feedback strategy, and more specifically as a trajectory tracking problem. So we have here the generation of an optimal solution, and we formalize our curve flattening problem in this way. So we want to find the level of social distancing such that the infected subjects are always under a given threshold, subject to the dynamics. And this, we prove in the paper that this problem has a closed form solution, which is this one here, where this guy here is the branch -1 of the Lambert W function. And these are just a few examples on how the optimal solution look like for different either thresholds or for different initial conditions. Now that we have an optimal solution, and we suppose also to have a knowledge of the statistics of the evolution of the epidemics, we can think of closing the loop to make everything more robust. So what we want to obtain is a rule that integrates the nominal behaviors with the actual ones in order to define the actual social distancing at any given time. This is the control rule that we propose. You can see that it's basically a model-free one. The goal is indeed to make this controller as robust as possible. So these are control gains. This is the reference. This is the tracking error. And this is the nominal control action as specified by the optimal control. You can notice here that it's true that this controller is model-free, but it has 2 important ingredients that requires a full understanding of the nonlinear dynamics to be put in place. One is this minus here, that so we have an opposite sign of the control inputs for the tracking of the infectious and the input for the tracking of the susceptibles. And then we have this compensation part that weights how much the real evolution is different from the ideal one. And in the paper, we present a lemma that proves that under certain hypotheses of these gains being positive and some extra hypotheses, we have the convergence of the state to the desired evolution. So perfect trajectory tracking asymptotically, of course, but exponentially fast. And in a nutshell, the proof is to start by introducing a change of coordinates and showing that in these coordinates, this is how the controller looks like in these coordinates, and defining the error in these coordinates between the desired evolution and the actual evolution. We get dynamics, which is the dynamics of the error, which is equivalent to the behavior of a mass spring damper system with nonlinear damping as stiffness. So we can take inspiration from the state-of-the-art of nonlinear control of mechanical systems to propose a Lyapunov function that we can then use to prove closed loop stability. And this is how the nominal behavior of this closed loop strategy looks like. It's probably more interesting to see how the behavior of the closed loop system in a more realistic situation is. And we have here, we implemented here a even more complex version of the model that we discussed in the beginning. So we have very high dimensional dynamics, and we have a whole bunch of extra factors that makes this situation pretty close to a realistic scenario. We identify the parameters of the systems on the example of the Codogno in Italy. And this is how the closed loop, the behavior looks like. So we have here the evolution of what would have happened with no lockdown. Then we have here what happens if we use a kind of harsh lockdown and then open again. So this is coherent with what we said before in the introduction. And then we have closed loop evolution, which is the behavior of the system when applying our feedback lockdown optimal rule. It has to be stressed that this is a stochastic system, and also the initial condition is also stochastic. And what you see here is the first and third quartile. So it's a robust statistical behavior. It's not just a single realization. And this is the evolution of the control action from harsh, small values are harsh lockdown, high values are soft lockdown, and this is the average evolution of the strategy. And this is how the total number of deaths is in the simulation. And we can see that in the beginning, these two strategies are comparable, but then at the end, the feedback lockdown is more effective. And that's all. Please take a look to the paper if you want to know more about it. And you can also ask me a question in the 3 minutes that will follow this talk. You can also send me an email to this email address or check my website. Thanks for your attention.